Welcome to AI for Sustainability, Navigating Opportunities, Risks, and Nature-Positive Solutions. My name is Scheck, and I am your moderator for this session today. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Camilo Alejo Monroy, a postdoctoral fellow at Concordia University and NSERC Alliance Project, Equitable Futures for Nature-Based Solutions at Sustainability in the Digital Age and Future Earth Canada Hub. And I'm also pleased to introduce Jonathan Brun, the CEO and founder of Mnemonic. This session will provide a comprehensive exploration of AI's role in advancing environmental sustainability while highlighting practical applications, risks, and collaborative approaches for ethical implementation. With that, we will go ahead and start with Dr. Camilo Alejo today.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'm going to stand up, I guess. See what I'm showing here. Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Yeah, it works, right? Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Let me walk you through very quick about what we do, and then we can have a chat all together. So this is an NSERC Alliance project with Microsoft, and basically we're trying to use AI tools for nature-based solutions. So just briefly, what do we do at Future Earth Canada Hub? We're based at Concordia University, Montreal. So we work at the interface of the digital age tools, including AI, trying to think about policies and decision-making, and think how we can push sustainability goals. That's what we do. So overall, what we could say is that we want to reach sustainability in the digital age. That's what we do. And so how do we do it? How do we reach sustainability in the digital age? So we're part of the coalition of digital environmental sustainability that we could champion that project along with UN organizations. And so for doing that, so we need a common vision to reach what we call sustainability in the digital age. And part of that vision, I guess we can say, like, includes two sides of the same coin. So first, we want to think, how do we mitigate the environmental and social impacts of digital tools? That's one thing. Then we need to think strategically, how do we promote innovation for sustainability? So we need to have like both approaches in mind when we think about sustainability in the digital age. And I think nature-based solutions are a very good pilot about thinking, how do we use digital tools for sustainability? So just briefly, when I talk about nature-based solutions, what I'm talking about are actions in ecosystems for people's benefit. So I don't know, restoration, conservation, management actions, right? And in the end, the ultimate goal is to enhance nature to address societal challenges such as climate change or biodiversity loss. So I'll walk you through two cases very quick about how do we use AI for nature-based solutions. So this is case one. We use AI to prioritize nature-based solutions. So in this case, what do we have? We have a simulated environment, hypothetical species. Imagine that this hypothetical environment has anthropogenic pressures. Some areas are more pristine than others, so you can simulate that. And then you can ask an agent to explore and act on this simulated environment. And we do it through something called reinforcement learning. Maybe some of you might know it. So basically, we can ask this agent, okay, explore and take actions. So I want you to choose in this simulated environment 30% of land that would maximize the occurrence of a species and at the same time would avoid some pressure. And if it makes a good job, you reward it. And if not, like, you don't, right? Like as you would do with your dog. You give it treats or not, right? So that's the way we do it. And you do this after many iterations, you would have this trained model that can make like optimal decisions. And you can then use the trained model into the real world. So for example, we have been trying to answer the question, which 30% of degraded lands in Canada should be restored? So this is part of what we got. So in this case, we say, okay, so maximize the species protection. Obviously, because identify 30% of land, and obviously avoid intact areas, because we don't want the agent to choose areas that are already healthy ecosystems. And so this is what we get. So I'll just go very quick into the details. So in green, you see restoration priorities, and it seems evident that most of them are in the prairies and also the mix with plains in southern Quebec and Ontario. And so there are some evident trade-offs there, right? So obviously, we're talking about agricultural lands, which are an essential part of Canadian economy. And we also know that those areas are already and will experience like climate pressures, water surface instability, and so on. So we can already assume that we cannot restore fully that 30%. But I mean, no action is not an option to maintain the goods and benefits from these lands. Like, we need to take some action. So for instance, I don't know, tea intercropping, silvopasture, that could be part of the portfolio of actions that we could take in these restoration priorities. We have also tried other scenarios. So we have prioritized areas with large carbon storage, like forests, peatlands. And so when you do it, so this is how it looks. So most of the priorities then in green, they're mostly across the boreal forests and also the montane cordillera. So many of them here, actually. And so just to talk about a few implications. So we have found like around 25% of those priorities are near or overlap with energy sector activities, then some with the forestry sector. But again, trade-offs also imply some opportunities. So why don't we think, like, we have found that some of those areas will actually be climate refugia, so very technical term there, but basically areas that will allow a species to prevail under the climate change. So some actions should be taken there, they're worth, and I'm sure that they will make resilient ecosystems that would benefit not only biodiversity or other ecosystem services that emerge from them, but directly would benefit those economic sectors that are around these ecosystems. And a final case to finish. So we are also using large language models. So basically what we are doing is we give some instructions to a large language model about what are nature-based solutions. And we then give it a bunch of documents, public documents, and we have been asking it to classify those projects just to have like a general landscape of nature-based solutions in Canada. And overall, some of the things we have found, we collected like for now, like around 1,000 projects. So we have seen geographic biases. Most of the projects are in Ontario, Quebec, and BC, for example. Most of funding goes for restoration. So we are hoping that this will inform decision-making in the long term, hopefully, or in the short term. So just take home messages from this. So NBS is a good case to think about, or nature-based solutions to think about sustainability in the digital age. With AI, we can find optimal outcomes, like the first case I showed you. But obviously there are trade-offs and opportunities that we need to think through. Let's keep in mind that environmental impacts differ. So the reinforcement learning algorithm I showed you, I could run it in my laptop. So very, like, one could say low environmental impact compared with the large language models of the second case. And finally, like my final message. So when we think about AI, it doesn't have to be a dialogue between the machine and some experts, but we need to create a broader dialogue, like create a collective intelligence when we are dealing with the potential, but also the risks of using AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alejo. A couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
In terms of social equity, how can AI processes be co-developed with stakeholders and rights holders to ensure the outcomes are inclusive and reflect the needs of all communities involved?
So I think there are two issues. There are, like, most of my work, as you saw, it's like spatial data. So scale is a great question. So in terms of, if you were talking about like large case studies like the one I showed you, like the first case I showed you, I think part of the issue is being critic about the results that you get. We need to be critic about those restoration priorities I showed you. Like, they are not a final word. They need to be discussed with different stakeholders. That data must be open. The code that you use must be accessible. So we can have a wide discussion and obviously translate those results. I'm part of academia. We need to translate those results to a common public. So I think that's part of making this more equitable. Now, if we are thinking about using AI in a lower scale, more place-based, I think, and this is part of our goal now. So we need to imagine how do we co-develop this kind of algorithms with people living experiences on the ground. So asking them which data we should use for these algorithms, which data we should not use, because that might be another issue. What are local priorities? Or think about how do we train this model that it's more meaningful for the actions people want to take on the ground, for example. But yeah, that would be a way.
Great, thank you. One final question. What ethical considerations should guide the collection, training, and interpretation of data used for environmental AI applications, especially when it comes to sensitive ecological areas?
Yeah, so we need to think about I believe that when we are using AI, I'm not a computer scientist, my degree is in biology, but when we're using these kind of algorithms, we need to think which people will be affected by this, what kind of information we're providing and who's getting affected. And sometimes the people that is becoming affected by this kind of information that AI is generating is are vulnerable communities, historically marginalized segments of society, and they should have a voice in this. We should get a guarantee that we can have a discussion with them. And I guess that takes me to my last take-home message, right? We need to have a broad discussion about what are the implications of these algorithms for people on the ground. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now we are going to have Jonathan Brun, the CEO of Mnemonic, talk about AI in environmental and regulatory compliance.
Hi everybody, good morning. Sorry we're the last ones before lunch. I know it's never, it keeps everybody hungry. So I'll speak a bit about AI and environmental compliance, regulatory compliance, specifically compliance to industry standards, directives, and other types of documents. So we'll cover a little bit the applications that we've done at Mnemonic and what we're looking at and how we help our customers deal with the mountains of regulations, directives, changes, standards, CSA standards, API standards, et cetera. Kind of opportunities in AI integration, some of the risks and mitigation strategies that we've deployed at Mnemonic and that I think are pretty relevant to anybody who's using AI. And I guess one word about AI, which is of course in the news every single day, it's like AI overload, and it's changing so fast. So I think AI is a catch-all for many different technologies. And so we gotta be a little bit careful sometimes when we talk about AI, it isn't one specific technology. And the AI that we're talking about a lot today, and in general, are these large language models, which are sort of one way of doing AI, if you want to call it that. But there are many other things out there. So what we've been doing at Mnemonic for a number of years, this is not recent, and this is not really specifically large language models, is basically just identifying the requirements and the applicability of laws, regulations, directives, and other documents that are issued either by governments or by industry bodies, and helping our customers, who are mostly industrial companies, oil and gas, a lot of customers in Calgary, mining, manufacturing, cities, helping them figure out what applies to me and what do I need to comply with. The average jurisdiction in Canada has about 3,500 active regulations that are currently in force. Now a subset of that is environment, to be fair, but you'll find environmental requirements in regulations that are not strictly speaking environmental. The point is, there's a lot of requirements out there for any business that's trying to operate, and getting through this amount of information is a really huge task. And there's a number of studies, particularly in the United States, that demonstrate that the vast majority of companies, and when I say vast majority, I'm like 95% plus, are out of compliance on a very regular basis. And it's not because they're, malicious or they don't want to do it. It's simply the challenge is massive. And so AI has a role to play to help companies better understand what they need to do, under what conditions, who needs to do it. And that's what we've been doing in Mnemonic. So basically our tool helps identify what's a requirement or an obligation, who it applies to. We then use a small learning model that's been trained on a vast data set, and every time we go into a new jurisdiction, we create a new data set. So even within Canada, you obviously have the English and French. You also have a different legal system in Quebec. If you go down to the States, it's a whole different system. Go to Germany, et cetera. So every time we go into a new jurisdiction, new language, we build up new data sets that allow us to train the models and then identify the requirements and regulations in Germany or in England or in other places. And we've achieved classification with about 95% accuracy, meaning 95% of the time we get the classification right, whether it's an obligation for a business, an obligation for government, or an applicability, like this applies if you have a storage tank of more than 10,000 liters of oil. And then 80% average efficiency. That means that basically 80% of the clauses get a classification. 20% our AI model will say, we're not too sure about this clause, so then it gets delegated to a human to go and verify what it looks like. We've also built a chatbot. So chatbot, all the rage, ChatGPT, of course, everybody's kind of familiar with that one. But what we've built is a chatbot that's specific to regulatory information and that's private and confidential. Because if you put your stuff into ChatGPT or other products, you have to go read the 25-page terms and conditions, but often there's some issues with the data privacy there. And especially if you're a company and you're asking very sensitive information, so you have a spill, you don't want that information just going into a model that might be discoverable through a judicial legal process, right? So we built an internal chatbot, basically leverages our database of regulations. We have about 750,000 regulations in our database today, 42 countries and 500 jurisdictions. And we're keeping this database up to date. So that's the other thing. When you're using a commercial chatbot, and some of them now have search. So ChatGPT has a search one for paid subscribers. There's AI search engines like Perplexity, where you can go and ask questions and it gives you a digested answer back. But often that information is not 100% up to date. It might be pretty current, but even if it's 1-2 weeks out or a month out, you might be missing critical information when it comes to compliance. So it leverages our up-to-date database. It pulls the question, finds the most relevant documents. Then we use the Claude model, which is provided by Amazon and Anthropic. And then basically you ask it a question and it gives you this digested answer. So yeah, it's being used to identify documents. Like I'm a city, I have a water treatment facility that produces this much water. What are some of the regulatory requirements that I have to look at? Find obligations within the documents, brainstorm on compliance issues. And one that came about through a consultant. So we made the chatbot available and we thought it would mostly be used for research purposes. But what people started using it for was doing their work for them. What a surprise, So we had auditors, consultants who did audits, who would come to the chatbot and say, I was walking around a facility and I saw someone working at height without a harness. Can you write up an audit finding and give me 3 corrective actions that should be issued to this facility or this client? And it does that whole work with you and it provides the citations. So the benefit there is massive because often no human has memorized all the regulatory requirements, even within one jurisdiction like Alberta. So it's a tool that really gives you superpowers. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the risks there, but that's a use case that really impressed us, and now more and more customers are doing that. The other area where we're using AI or generative AI is basically writing summaries of documents. So governments and again, industry bodies publish a crazy amount of documents, just crazy. The Federal Register in the United States, the Code of Federal Regulations in the United States is 200,000 pages long. And so you can imagine it's difficult to figure out what is what. But basically the AI allows you to write summaries that are frankly pretty good, and you can vary your summaries. You can ask the summaries to focus on certain things or certain areas. And that's the other area where we've done that, because in general, governments don't provide summaries of documents that can often be hundreds of pages long. All right, opportunities for AI integration. So while AI drives progress in data accessibility, the amount of unstructured data is just overwhelming. I mean, I think I just mentioned 200,000 pages for the US Federal Code of Regulations, 3,000 or so regulations and acts in a province. So the AI is really good at taking this mountain of information and starting to create some structure that you can then use to filter, sort, and categorize and organize. And compliance is often perceived as a very dry and boring topic. Surprise, surprise. But I'd say AI has a lot of potential to sort of make it more relevant to our day-to-day lives and demonstrate how, if we don't stay in compliance with best practices, industry best practices, regulations, it has real consequences. And somewhat unrelated to AI, but one thing that we do at the company every month is we watch a documentary or a movie about an environmental disaster. And I can guarantee you that pretty much every single one of these environmental disasters can be linked back to compliance issues. But the AI allows you to start to understand the impacts of being out of compliance for certain critical regulations and within the context of environmental issues. Risk and mitigation strategies. So there are risks involved in this. It's all not just perfect. So hallucinations, I think we've probably heard about this. This is basically a response that is ungrounded, meaning it's not grounded in fact. It's made up by the AI, or misgrounded. It's attributed to a fact, but it's like the wrong fact. It doesn't support it, and is ultimately inaccurate. There's also incomplete responses where the AI gives you a partial response that sounds really good, but is actually missing critical information. So we have to consider this in the architecture of our tools, keep up with the latest developments. We've implemented augmented retrieval, RAG, with forced citations, where basically force the chatbot to give you the citations to the sources that are being used. And we will also expose to our users the reasoning that the chatbot went through to get to the answer that it provided to the user. So you don't just get the answer, you get the citations, often to laws, regulations, and standards. And the chatbot will show you, well, we searched this information, it went here, it found this, and it got to this answer. So basically, it's a way for you to verify the work of the chatbot. Other thing, data risks. So there's copyrighted material that has been embedded into these models. There's a lot of lawsuits going on right now against things like ChatGPT. So you got to be careful about putting copyrighted material into this. For example, if you use CSA standards in Canada, that material is copyrighted. You cannot legally put it into a chatbot. So you got to be aware of this, and some people have put it into their chatbots regardless. We of course don't, but Mnemonic has agreements with all the major standards publishers, so we're working on building chatbots for groups like CSA and others. Personal sensitive data can be exposed. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. If you're putting your data into one of these models, it potentially can be saved in the model and then exposed. You can think of that from a corporate point of view. Mitigation, so segregating information, open source models. Camilo talked a bit about that before, and deploying things on our own servers and best practices. And when we come back to hallucinations, and we can talk a bit more about this in the Q&A, I think it's so critical that people who are using chatbots double check everything. And the need for technical expertise today, I would argue, is even higher with the chatbots than before, because, and we've even had staff at Mnemonic that clearly just copy-pasted something from ChatGPT without understanding what the thing was about. And that can be extremely dangerous. You think of a consultant who goes to a client, doesn't really know the answer, chatbot, copy-paste, it's just a huge can of worms. So you gotta really be diligent about making sure that people using these tools have deep technical knowledge and can verify that the information is correct. So that's, I think, it for my presentation. Happy to do some Q&A. Hopefully it's helpful, and happy to do a product demo later on if anybody wants to see anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I have a couple of questions here. As AI becomes more integrated into compliance processes, How do you address concerns regarding intellectual property and data security during AI trading and usage?
Yeah, I think that's, if you're using a commercial product as a company at least, you should really check the architecture of the system, because there's a lot of companies out there that are basically just putting a layer on top of ChatGPT. And they say, this is an environmental chatbot, but in the background, they're just sending all your information to some commercial product that has a whole separate set of terms and conditions and might be doing some funny business with your data. So as a company, at least, make sure you go through your contracts and really understand what's the architecture of the software, the systems, the models, the vector database. So at least at Mnemonic, we're doing everything in-house so that we can guarantee to our customers that there's no data leakage and that it won't be, go onto some server somewhere that then is subject to a legal case. So you got to do your due diligence when you're buying these tools, just as you would for other products that you're purchasing. But it's a real risk for sure.
Great, thank you. One last question. One challenge in compliance is keeping up with constantly changing regulations. How can AI tools, like those from Mnemonic, enhance engagement with regulatory frameworks and improve adaptability?
Yeah, the change is overwhelming. So about 3% of the regulatory body changes every year. I think every month we publish about 4,000 regulatory changes around the world. So it can be quite overwhelming for people. And sometimes the reaction to that is, well, I'm just going to ignore the regulatory changes, or I'm going to do it once a year. And that opens up all sorts of risks. I think AI has a role to play in helping filter the information, provide summaries of the documents. Does this really apply to me or not? And basically helping the customers understand, what do I need to do? So the AI now can actually, and we're working on this, can take, let's say you have policies, procedures, documents that you've created internally to try and keep your organization running in compliance and running properly. The AI now can take your data, your own internal documents, your licenses and permits, your standard operating procedures, and then compare it to the regulatory data to verify, are there things that are missing in your policies and procedures, or things in your policies and procedures that contradict what the regulatory requirements are. So there's a bunch of other, and that wasn't really in the slide deck, but there's more and more use cases where basically the AI is going to do this work for you and pre-digest the information to just make it easier to manage the amount of change that's happening in the regulatory body, as well as in industry standards as well. So there's some really exciting stuff happening, and I think it'll make compliance easier and more accessible, and just make companies' lives a little bit easier.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to have a brief panel discussion, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So just a few panel discussion questions here for both of you. In your opinion, what are the best practices for involving stakeholders in AI projects to ensure decisions are transparent, accountable, and equitable?
Yeah, I guess I would go back to the previous your previous questions. So we always need to map what are the stakeholders involved. We need to think about which stakeholders and even rights holders are involved. I think that's an essential step, and how they might be misrepresented or represented, but by whatever reason you're using AI. And I in my ideal world, but I know it's difficult, but at least it's something that we are really pushing with our team, is let's keep people on the loop in all these steps when you are using AI algorithms based on these stakeholders that you are dealing with as much as possible. So and as I said, in terms of the data that you use, in terms of training, I spoke about prioritization models. So I don't know, for example, the species that might be important in one place for some reason are not the same that will be important in another place. Some people want to, or communities or municipalities, they want to focus on climate change mitigation, carbon storage. So that should be the focus. And then get the results, see what an AI algorithm is saying, and collectively see what are those results. Should we try it again? Should we reiterate? Like, so maybe the training fail, or maybe the results are not responding to the needs of the stakeholders. So I think we need to have a dialogue as we use these tools. And part of that is making sure that not only the experts, but the people that are involved in using these AI algorithms, they have at least some basic understanding of the tools that we are using. Not just showing, oh yeah, you have this question, here's a product, thank you so much. Like, I think that there needs to be like some, I guess, common base knowledge among all the parts involved. Yeah.
I'd say, we have our life maybe a little bit easier than Camilo in the sense that we're dealing with laws, regulations, and documents that are sort of available and they're there and they're objective fact. I think when working with these AI models, what we've done is we've built it, shown it to various industry experts, subject matter experts, have them validate things, have them provide feedback to us, and leverage their knowledge and expertise to make the AI, at least the chatbot, better. The other thing I think that's really important if you're deploying any sort of tool around AI within your organizations is to understand some of the fundamental limitations of at least these large language models, because there's a lot of stuff happening in the news. And I think there's some people that are insinuating that these AI models can reason, that they can think like a human. And I would argue, and there's a whole debate going on around this, but I would argue that that's not true, and it will never be true with large language models. In my opinion, large language models are extremely good at looking at a huge amount of data in this data set and then digesting it and giving you an answer. Think of it as super search or unbelievable autocorrect. But fundamentally what it's doing is it's taking a huge data set, converting it into vectors, math, numbers, and then using extremely sophisticated autocomplete to give you something that sounds really good. But these models, I would argue, cannot fundamentally reason. They can't go out of what's in the data set. So it's like the famous example of the black swan, where it's like, until we went to Australia, we believed that all swans were white. But then we went to Australia and lo and behold, there were black swans. But there were no black swans in our data set from Europe. Therefore, we thought black swans didn't exist. And so that's a fundamental limitation of these large language models that I think everybody just needs to be aware of, and not pretend that they are going to reason outside of the data set they have. And that has, diversity and equity and inclusion issues as well. But yeah.
Thank you both. Given the broad societal impacts of AI, how do you think AI can be responsibly leveraged to address environmental issues without exacerbating social inequities or harming vulnerable communities?
Two aspects obviously related. So you have sustainability issues, or environmental issues, and you have like social issues. They're obviously interconnected. I think in terms of environmental issues and doing like the right thing when we are using AI, I think we need to have a better understanding of what are the environmental impacts of these tools, like in terms of energy, in terms of water use in data centers, what is the impact of building these data centers? So like some climate and nature related financial disclosures for in this context. Like we need to have a better understanding that for me as a user will allow me to say, okay, like the impacts of this algorithm are huge compared with this other, and I would prefer to use this one or the other. And once again, in terms of like social issues, like, yeah, I would iterate what I said before. People need to be involved. People need to understand what we are doing. And part of the work we're doing with codes, the coalition of digital environmental sustainability, is to try to think, how do we educate a wide segment of society to understand what AI tools are, and how do we build like some critical thinking about the use of large language models and other machine learning algorithms. So I think that those two factors like should be part of the answer. Probably not all, but yeah.
The way I feel about this is there's a huge freight train coming and it's extremely difficult to predict what's going to happen. I think it's impossible to predict what's going to happen. It's a bit like the advent of the internet or the advent of railroads back in the 1800s. I've been in the tech industry now for 20 years. I remember when the internet really started. Anybody who says they can predict what's going to happen, I just don't believe it. I think there'll be environmental impacts, positive and negative. There'll be massive economic impacts, positive and negative. So I don't know. I mean, I think buckle up is kind of how I would describe this. If you're a white collar worker, consultant, information knowledge person, you got to be paying close attention to this. In the same way that outsourcing, sending stuff to Asia in the 1980s and 90s decimated lots of communities, I think there's a real risk for a lot of white collar work as well. And that's the economic sort of social inequity side of this. So yeah, I don't want to make any specific predictions. All I would say is this is real. This is real and it's going to change things substantially for better and for worse, just like other technologies before it.
Great, thank you. We can now open it up for any questions. Feel free to raise your hand, and the Eco-Canada staff have a mic in the back for you to use.
Is there?
I was watching some videos online, and it was people showing how to shut off Microsoft Word, scraping all your Word files to plug them into AI. And I saw another one where you could do that for Google because they do this through your Gmail account
Sure.
and your other Google account. And like, I'm an engineering consultant. I don't want Google or Microsoft reading all of my documents, stuff that I've written for my clients, you know, stuff that is very specific for a specific building, for a specific application, and then putting that into a model. And I'm wondering, like, I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room that's going to have a problem with that. So how do we stop these big companies, I guess, from taking all of our data and then thinking that they own it? Because just because we're using their product, which we're paying for, now they think that they get to own our intellectual property. It's I don't know what the question is, but my thing is like, this is wrong, and I think there should be something done about it. So I don't know what, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, so I guess I can just give a kind of answer from my line of work. So something when we have, like I work with geospatial data, and when we work with communities on the ground, like part of the process to make it transparent is to create data governance agreements. And so we discuss with people, okay, so which data are we going to use, how we can use it, and we cannot use it beyond those limits. And I guess like it should be the way it works elsewhere, right? Like with all big companies and so on. How do we do it? I am not sure. I guess we like all together we need to push for it. But there needs to be like some capacity to say, you cannot use my data, or you can stop using it and I'm going to take it with me somewhere else. But yeah, like, I'm not sure how exactly we can get there.
I mean, obviously going in, educating yourself and turning off the settings and doing things like that is a great first step, and you're probably a very small percentage of people are going to do that. I don't have any magic solutions, so like unless the government decides they want to take action on this, there's frankly probably not much we can do. If you look at other examples where large tech companies came in and just basically operated illegally until they were legalized, you look at Uber and Airbnb, their playbook, which is similar to what Google and others are doing, is they come in with a product that is really great for the consumer, and the demand for it is so overwhelming that the government can't really come in and shut down Uber because everybody loves Uber, even though it's killed the taxi industry and different cities have different systems. But and Airbnb is sort of similar. So that's the playbook. And the honest to God truth is it's worked in the past and it's generated these billions and billions of dollars of profit for these companies. So yeah, I mean, it would have to be a concerted effort by the government to fight, which is a huge, huge tall order. They haven't really fought against the tech companies seriously yet. So I don't know, so I'm very optimistic, but yeah. I'd say try and do what you can to limit the access to your data. But there's tons of lawsuits happening by like all the major media that had their data scraped to go into the models. Like there's tons of lawsuits happening. Yeah.
First of all, thank you to Mr. Brun and Dr. Alejo. My question is to Dr. Alejo. Since nature-based solutions have a clear spatial dimension, would you say that current trends in AI assist environmental professionals in overcoming the technical barriers needed to come up with solutions?
Sorry, but so do you mean? Could you explain again your question?
So my question basically is, let's say you work for an environmental firm and they have a designated GIS guy, right? Would the current trends in AI, like making it easier for people to use the technical knowledge without having a background in GIS, do you see it helping the industry in coming up with solutions?
So I guess my short answer would be yes. Like as I was telling you, like I'm not a computer scientist. I'm a biologist. But I came with this and I find it very useful. And I think other people can also benefit. Let's say, large language models could help us to code and or do like some GIS processes. So yeah, my short answer is like I think it's like we're making knowledge more accessible, and obviously like businesses or public sector should benefit from it. Like if people have enough literacy about what we are doing with AI, like they can have also like I guess could have a more structured opinion of let's say what I'm showing. Like I would love people to criticize what I'm doing. So it goes back to create this common base of knowledge like between everyone, so everyone can understand the basics of how we are using AI, spatial models, and have a discussion. And I think there's a good opportunity there. Like how do we advance that? Like I guess that we're like how do we create this common base knowledge? Like I think we're like we still need to think about how do we reach that. But yeah, like if you were interested in the educational piece, like please check what I was mentioning, CODES, the Coalition of Digital Environmental Sustainability. Like I think there's some work being done there to think about how people can be educated and be more critic about how we are using this kind of tools.
Everybody's hungry.
There's a question there.
Hi, thank you for all of the information so far at this session. One of the questions that I had that just kind of sprung up while I was listening is, I've heard a lot about the issues with building the data centers necessary for AI and how over time more and more data centers are going to be needed. Do either of you have suggestions on how to kind of balance the need for confidentiality and more specialized AIs that don't share confidential information with too many other people, while also not having too many AIs that'll make it so that more and more data servers would be needed for all of these different AI models?
Well, I mean, the amount of data servers or data centers that are going to be built for AI, I think that's something that's very difficult to predict. I mean, for those of you who maybe saw in the news, DeepSeek, this Chinese model that came out, I guess, last week or 2 weeks ago, long story short, it's like way more efficient. So there's efficiencies that are being found that basically reduce the need for more data centers. And we've seen this happen in many other industries over time. So I don't think that's as big a surprise as some people claim it to be. But in terms of confidentiality, a lot of it just comes back to the architecture of the software. Like our systems, though they're built in-house at Mnemonic, they're all sitting on Amazon's data centers. I mean, we don't have our own data center in our office, but then we're using certain tools and the data is segregated in a certain way, and there's certain legal agreements in place that ensure a certain level of confidentiality. And then us, Mnemonic, as a company, we get certified to a standard called ISO 27001, which is Information Security Management system. And so, if you're looking for something that's going to be confidential, whether it's AI related or not, you kind of want to look for these types of certifications. Because the vast majority of confidentiality breaches and hacks and things of that nature are humans doing it. So humans with bad passwords, humans that give access to the wrong people, people who leave a company but their accesses aren't removed. So that's like 99% of information security issues are human related. We often think of like a hacker who grabs his laptop and hacks into the NSA and steals everything. That doesn't happen. Like, it happens so rarely, it's not even worth talking about. The vast majority is somebody with a bad password or a phishing attack where you get an email that says, click here and fill out your SIN and, et cetera. So having that information layer for humans is just as important as the IT architecture and the legal agreements that you put in place for your system. So it's this multi-layer approach. We have a whole nother talk on information security, but yeah, I don't know if that answers the question at all, but yeah. I don't know if you have anything to add, Camilo.
Like, I guess I would take a step back, and something that really impresses me is that we don't have a real understanding of the environmental impacts of data centers. Like, so I guess before we think about the demand and so on, we need to understand there needs to be some real robust assessment of what are their impacts, so they can inform regulations, etc. So I think that's another piece. Like, I don't think, like, yes, we understand how much energy is consumed by training a large language model. We have some understanding. Some people have understood, okay, like these machine learning algorithms, they consume this much or not. Like, so we have an understanding about that, but I think we don't have a clear understanding of the, I guess, like a life cycle assessment of what implies to create a data center. And that should inform how do we regulate and how do we mitigate the impacts of data centers, for example. Yeah.
Hi, let me just give you a concrete example of what Jonathan mentioned about if you're a white collar worker, watch out. Different industry, but I was at my doc the other day. Being the vintage that I am, I walk in with about 5 things I want to talk over with him. And the doc says, do you mind if I record this? Because usually he's, typing in all this information. No, go ahead. So he's got a new AI program. And basically, as we're going through all these 5 different things and I'm telling him what's going on and he's feeding stuff back, the program basically takes that and it sorts it all out into, here's the issues, here's the diagnosis, here's the treatment, here's the follow-up. And he says it does that way better than he can do it.
Yeah.
So that's given the problem with doctor shortages, that's likely going to be your first line for many people, is talking to some sort of an AI physician. And then on top of that, he says, well, all those 800 radiologists that are in Calgary that interpret your x-rays and all this other stuff, that's their job. They get these things and they interpret and they write it up. AI can do it better than any of those individual people. So now you take 800 radiologists, you say, we don't need you anymore, but there's the money from those 800 radiologists that then can be applied elsewhere in the healthcare system. So I think, it's both, oh, look out, and oh, what are the opportunities that are coming out of that? But I wouldn't have thought of that, in the medical profession, but here it comes.
Yeah, there was on the medical side, which out of scope of environmental issues, but I think there's a lesson here. There's a solid study that came out a couple months ago that I found fascinating, where they tested doctors and they wanted to see what's the best for diagnosis? Is it a highly trained, experienced doctor? Is it a highly trained, experienced doctor with an AI model that can ask questions and do things, or just the AI model? And so they benchmarked it, and what they found, quite interesting, at least I found quite interesting, was the best is just the AI model. Because when the doctor uses the AI model, and they use it in a biased way to actually confirm the diagnosis that they think this patient has. So like, I think this patient has, whatever, pneumonia. And they start asking the AI questions in a way that actually kind of encourages the AI to confirm their own diagnosis of the patient. And so there's this subjectivity that the doctor has because of his training, because of his experience, because of cases he's seen in the past. Whereas the AI model, at least in this study, was much more objective and provided more accurate diagnosis, especially on sort of the long tail. And I think, if you're a consultant or if you're working within a company, you need to be conscious of that as well. As if you're using the AI, how are you using it? Are you really using it in an objective manner, or are you using it just to confirm something that you already thought? And there's a risk there. And that's something that's going to be really hard, maybe hard to manage. I don't think AI is going to replace all doctors, but I do think it will change doctors' roles because a lot of the upfront work of diagnosis will be able to be done with AI, and the doctor should be there for other steps in the process, discussions, treatment plans, and kind of helping the patient along. So anyways, I think it's going to change the roles that people have. It's just like, internet and search and other things have changed the roles, but it's really interesting.
I guess I have two reactions. One is like, we still need to think about the social acceptability of having an AI radiologist telling us what do I have. Like, I don't know if people will accept that openly. And so we need to navigate that situation. So obviously there's labor shortage and we need to address it. But I think if we want to widely implement AI, like we need to maintain trust between like people that are using this and people that are developing like AI algorithms and so on. And I don't know if you read the news, but there was a bill in California, I think it was passed last week, because there are you have these health companies and they have a chat and they say, oh, you're talking to a medical expert. And so you think that you're talking to a doctor or a psychologist, and you even ask him, what's your degree? Oh, I'm a psychology from the University of California, Berkeley, and so on. And it's a large language model answering. So they had to pass a bill just so people can understand that they are not talking to a practitioner, that they are talking to a chatbot, because there was not transparency in that sense. So that takes me back, so if we want to build around this opportunity of AI, we cannot miss people's trust, and we need to be transparent about it.
Great.
I'm even more before lunch, so I'm going to make this quick. So I think the governance issues that you raise, we can't rely on the government. But we've got a meeting going on, and a G7 meeting going on right now around AI, and I think there's some really good discussions occurring there. But right here in our own province in Edmonton, we've got the genesis of ethical AI that's been going on for years. But those are business driven. So my one comment before my question is, this needs to be business driven. As business owners, as consumers, we have to push back, because the suppliers will take everything we give them. Now, my question, this is the Environmental Careers Organization. So everybody at this meeting is either an employer, an employee, or a prospective employee. I would not recommend, if I had grandchildren, which I don't, to become a radiologist, a lawyer, or an accountant, because their jobs are disappearing, or a journalist, sorry, it kind of sucks. They've completely suspended and rebuilding journalism programs because the world is just completely turned upside down. So now, if we were to be encouraging people to, in high school, or entering university or college, what do they take? What do they do? Right? This is applied science? Is it, I took the computer science course. Yeah, I know. I knew how to program, not anymore. Right? I had my physics, my math, my biology, my toxicology, all that kind of stuff. English course, yeah, I actually can write. I don't need to chat GPT to write a letter for me. It just does it faster, and then I fix it. But this is about evolution, adaptation. The way we're going to be, we've heard this morning, those that are going to be successful in business, either running businesses or working within businesses, is the ability to adapt and work within that. So I really appreciate your input and your thoughts as what kind of direction, thoughts, suggestions, considerations, and what can we or what should we be doing either as part of ECO or other organizations driving and leading this because the world is changing underneath our feet.
I'll leave that to you first.
Okay. I don't think you can cheat in life. And so my general recommendation is master the basics first. We get job applicants all the time, of course, and we put stuff in the job ad to trip up the AI. And we get these cover letters that are generated by AI that say just hilarious things like, I love to ride unicorns and eat candy cane, because we put that in the job ad. And so obviously we don't hire these people that are sending us cover letters generated by AI. But I mean, I think it's all about, you gotta master the basics. And that means how to speak properly, how to write properly, how to think clearly. If I were to make one recommendation, it's study philosophy, study physics, study something that teaches you how to think in a critical manner, because you're gonna be inundated, we already are inundated with information. It is such a noisy world with our alerts, social media, now the AI stuff, that it can be completely overwhelming to know how to navigate all this. And so getting those critical tools in place in your brain, writing, speaking, analysis, reading comprehension. I sound like a high school teacher or something, but this is basically, if the vast majority of people don't, the applicants that we see don't get this. They don't know how to write a cover letter for a job ad. They don't know how to do what I would consider very basic things. And they sometimes say, oh, I'm just gonna use the AI to do that. But that's not gonna fly. And so whether I'm an engineer, but same thing with engineering, We had this whole debate about the TI-83 calculators when I was in high school, the graphic calculators. So, you wanna learn the actual core stuff. And then you can use AI to move faster and do things better. But you can't skip. And if you learn those core things, I think you'll do fine. But if you skip them, you'll be in big trouble. That's kind of my take on it. So yeah, physics, philosophy, writing, math. It's really not overly complicated, at least from my point of view.
Yeah, what I add is that we need to remain, and you mentioned it, we need to remain critical. We need to, I guess, build skills as critical thinkers. And so now that we have all this information, that's something that I struggle with my teenage daughter. She shows me, oh, I found this on Instagram. And okay, let's check if that sounds like fake. But, and then we have to check together and see oh, okay, that's real or not. But my point is that we need to remain skeptical about all these sources of information that we have. And we need to triple check what we are doing. And I think the issue with AI is that it's creating this shortcut or apparent shortcut that we can have quick answers. And I think that is not right. So yeah, in addition to what you say, let's try to keep a critical thinking, skeptical angle about what we do and as professionals. We can leverage AI, but we need to remain skeptical about that.
Great. Thank you everyone for all the questions. I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to summarize those key takeaways really quickly before we send everyone off to lunch.
I don't want to hold people up for lunch. I don't know, just good luck.
I would say let's maintain, let's not let AI further break trust between people. We need to find ways to maintain trust with each other. So that would be my take-home message, right?
Thank you everyone so much for coming. Up next is lunch in the main ballroom. There will be about a 10-minute break, so if you have a minute, feel free to check out the exhibit hall. I'll be there with my company, Agents of Discovery, if you want to learn more about augmented reality education. So yeah, thank you.